The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles. Yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing with his death the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and kept a purse, and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it, indeed. Fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For, as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes, the importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the 2nd chapter, Sri Krishna states, If one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramhansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
I'd like to welcome you all this morning. My name is Ram, Tyagi Ram, and my wife, Tyagi Dikshini. Whispers from Eternity is a book of prayer poems by Paramahansa Yogananda, and I'd like to share with you now the prayer poem for this week. Demand to set fire to the forest of darkness. I built a fire of devotion in the dark forest of delusion. Alas, the fire only smoldered. Then thou didst come and set fire to a few of my frailties. That fire quickly spread, consuming the bushes of my prickling desires, my tall, towering vanities, and the thick underbrush of my arrogance. The whole forest of my darkness is blazing, and I behold only thy light shining everywhere. I thank thee, Father, for thou didst help me thus always. Let me open a path of light for all to follow. I thank thee, Father, for thy help. Help me thus always. Let me open a path of light for all to follow. This topic today on why devotees fall is a very important one, because we are here today as devotees on the journey of eternity. I remember when I first came on the path, I was listening to these words. I went to the local SRF church in Hollywood, and I was hearing people say the devotees of the path of self-realization. I was thinking, devotees? Now that I've never heard that word before in the hood. This concept of a devotee, which is the root of devotion, is something that's very, very important for us to understand. What is a devotee? What is devotion? Well, Yogananda talked about devotion as being the intense love for God. To understand that this God is something not outside of ourselves. He said self-realization is the knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that you are now in possession of the kingdom of God. You don't have to pray that it come to you. All you need to do is increase your knowing. So devotion is that effort, taking the time to put in the effort. St. Paul said, I pray unceasingly. Well, you scratch your head. Well, how can you pray unceasingly? I remember one of my uncles who was I have a family of ministers, and my mother, she always prayed, I want to have a minister in my family. And my brother didn't become a minister, but I became a minister, but not in the church that she brought us up in. So that brought her great disappointment. And so this longing that we need to cultivate is putting forth the effort. And there's a lack of this understanding in religion. There's a thought, well, if I just simply pray to Jesus, He takes care of it all. He's taken everything on the cross for me. I don't have to do anything. I can do whatever I want to do now. I'm free. I'm saved. And you can have that same consciousness. Yes, well, Krishna has done it all. It's by God's grace I'm here, by Kripa, that I live my life. No, we have to put forth the effort. And this is what St. Paul was saying, that I pray unceasingly. I put forth the effort to cultivate within my heart a greater desire, not for the materiality, the materialism of this world. Gosh, I got to get my iPad. I'm behind on this thing. I got to get this house. I got to get this, and I got to keep up with technology. We're spinning our wheels when we begin to see the outer facade of this world as being our ultimate fulfillment. When we learn to cultivate the inner realities of love for God, then we will find our true freedom. And it doesn't matter what religion we follow. When we attain that oneness with the Christ, with the Krishna, with that consciousness which is permeated in all creation of that power of God, then we will begin to see, but who am I really? Is this God that I'm worshiping in the forms of Jesus, of Yogananda, of Krishna, of Buddha, of Muhammad? This God is really a part of myself. And that is what devotion is all about. Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, said, don't expect to take one step on the spiritual journey to enlightenment unless you can cultivate the natural love of your heart. Now, so many times we think, well, devotion, what is God? And well, we can have devotion toward God through our children, through our husbands, through our wives, through our families. In fact, in the beginning, that's the closest thing that we have to see outwardly of what God is. I used to have a music teacher, and he was the music teacher for the Vatican Boys Choir. His name is Salvatore Darro, and he came to Ananda in the early 80s, and he used to teach the Ananda singers, and he would have this question, what is God? What is God? Breathe and know that God is the essence just behind your breath. And when you talk about God being just the essence behind your breath, it becomes a marvelous journey. How many of you are not breathing? Raise your hand. That is the link between you and spirit. The breath, that essence just behind your breath, is your key to unlock the mystic doors of awakening so that you can find out who and what you really are in this moment of eternity. The ancient mystic Patanjali called it what? Smriti, divine memory. And in this divine memory, as we begin to practice conscious breath or energy or essence control in our path of Kriya Yoga, we call it Kriya. We use the breath on a daily basis. We practice, when we evolve on the path of Kriya, 108 breaths, conscious breathing twice a day, until that presence of the energy and consciousness behind the breath becomes manifest. And then you, at a certain point, you can raise your hand and say, I stopped breathing. Because in that presence, in that stillness, in that prayer of unceasing prayer of the breath that reminds us of who we are as children of the one God, as you get into that unceasing prayer, the breath stops and God is your reflection. And this is what Jesus taught. I and my Father are one. In our reading today, the topic is, why do devotees fall? Well, it's simple. We haven't gotten to the point of praying unceasingly. We haven't gotten to the point of going without the breath, getting into that inner essence. And what happens when we get caught up in the facade of this world and we don't take the time to meditate? There's a lot of problems that happen. Things are falling apart in our lives. We get upset. We get angry. One thing or another. I was up on Sunset the other day and driving down the strip. And I was checking out the crowds of people in front of the Viper Club. You know about the Viper Club. You've been there. And the snake of delusion is biting them. And inflicting that venom of desire and materialism, and for ultimate fulfillment and stardom. I want to be a star on Hollywood Boulevard. That's my goal. I want to be like John Wayne. I want to be like Madonna. I want to be like Marilyn Monroe. But we go through countless incarnations based on desire. How does Krishna put it in the Bhagavad Gita? In the Gita here? Is it on the right page? I love this passage. It's the most profound passage in my opinion, which talks about why devotees fall. If one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. It's really quite amazing when you start thinking about these words. I'm attracted to something. Okay, I want it. I desire it. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. If I don't get this, I'm going to be really pissed off. From anger there arises infatuation. The delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to and at the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From the forgetfulness of the higher self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty, and with discrimination is loss. When that is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. It's really amazing to meditate on these words of Krishna. Because what he's essentially saying is, when the energy flows out of us and we begin to identify the things of this world, we become so involved and don't take the time to withdraw from the five senses. Because we think, this is the only reality. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to go after. These are my goals in life. But when we become devotees, we learn to withdraw the sensation of energy moving out to bringing it back in to its source. And as we bring it back into its source, that energy, and cultivate the desire or the devotion to know the truth behind the facade of this world, we attain to that point of stillness. As it says in the Bible, be still and know that I am God. That's what the practice of meditation, that's what the path of self-realization is all about. It's the balancing between the inner, the outer, and the inner life. To the point when you find your freedom. As it says, you're not free until you find Nirvikalpa Samadhi in the reading. What does Nirvikalpa Samadhi mean? That's a mouthful. Let's say it together. Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's a Sanskrit phrase which is describing the journey that we're all on, right here and now. It's a journey of eternity that we're on right here and now. And it's a phrase that describes our union, our yoking, our yoga in body, with the mind, with the soul, and yoking, binding ourselves with the one. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the highest state of union with God. It's the state in which you meditate and you begin to realize, well, who am I really? And you begin to feel that presence behind the breath, and the breath stops and your heart begins to open and you feel such great joy. And you take that joy and you live your life constantly in a spirit of that joy. Yogananda was someone who had Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He was constantly living in a state of perpetual joy, ever new joy. There's a quote that I'd like to use from the Master, from Autobiography of a Yogi, and it's a beautiful statement that he gives. The advanced yogi, withholding all his mind, will, and feeling from false identification with bodily desires, uniting his mind with superconscious forces in the spinal centers, in the spinal shrines, thus lives in this world as God hath planned, not impelled by impulses from the past, nor by new witlessnesses of fresh human motivations. Such a yogi receives fulfillment of his supreme desire, safe in the final haven of inexhaustibly blissful spirit. It's such this assurance, or this sort of roadmap that Yogananda is describing here is for us to just balance out our lives. This is the point that I'd like to leave with you today. And it doesn't matter what befalls you. If you can balance your life from the outer with the inner reality, cultivating devotion or love for God in your heart. You think of Judas, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. And here he betrayed Jesus. Well, obviously he didn't have nirvikalpa samadhi. He still had some faults to deal with. He was a little attached to the ducats. How many of us are attached to the ducats? Well, I am. So we have our play to go through. But even we recognize Judas as a traitor. He betrayed Jesus. Yogananda said, I met the reincarnation of Judas in this lifetime, during my lifetime, and he attained final liberation. He attained the nirvikalpa samadhi, the final proof of oneness with soul into spirit. And his name was Swami Brahmananda, and he was a devotee of Ramakrishna. And we were looking for the picture that we had of Swami Brahmananda because it has a very unique thing, that this was the soul of Judas, who had been reborn continually seeking to purify himself. And we're all on that journey. Yesterday we were at an art exhibit. It was the 85th birthday of Marilyn Monroe. And so there was a Marilyn Monroe art exhibit in Beverly Hills. And so we went to that exhibit. And afterwards, I told my wife, there is a book written about Marilyn Monroe's new incarnation, and how there was a woman who was born in Toronto. She had these deja vu experiences of seeing herself as Marilyn Monroe. And so she was going crazy with that thought. And she, in fact, was thinking of taking her life. She was so deluded and upset by what was going on. She went to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist regressed her into a past life in which she described that she was Marilyn Monroe. And they wrote a book. And I quote this book because we're in Hollywood, and of course these things are fascinating for all the movie fans. This is the Marilyn Monroe's Returns, The Healing of a Soul by Adrian Finkelstein. For 8 years he worked with this lady whose name was Sherry Laird. And finally, she has no more suicidal tendencies. The path of Kriya Yoga that the masters bring will help you to transcend all the karmas of your past life. Who were you in the past? It doesn't really matter. It's who you are right now that matters. Taking the effort to burn up the seeds. In our ceremony today, we were offering the seeds, the rice, into the fire of the flame of God's purifying love. And these seeds are symbolic of your past life tendencies lodged in your astral spine. And this is what Kriya Yoga is all about. I'd like to read one last quote that I have on Kriya Yoga for you. The Kriya Yoga which I am giving to the world through you in this 19th century, Babaji told Lahiri Mahashaya, is a revival of the same science which Krishna gave millennia ago to Arjuna, which was later known to Patanjali and to Jesus Christ, to St. John and St. Paul and other disciples. We're all on a on a journey, and this journey is one of eternity. Yogananda said, God is simple, everything else is complex. There was a man who came with a list of questions to Yogananda, and he said his first question, and Yogananda's response was, love God. He thought, scratched his head, and he read his second question. Yogananda's response was, love God. And the man scratched his head again, went to his third question, very complicated question. Love God. And Yogananda walked out of the room. And that's my simple message for you as devotees on the path of self-realization. Cultivate the love for God. When Swami Kriyananda came to Yogananda, the first thing Master said to him was, cultivate devotion. Get devotion. Get out of your mind, because what we perceive to be true is not what is the truth. And that inner truth can only be attained through a deep longing and devotion to become one with the mighty source of all that is. And then that way we become devotees. And even if we fall, we will lift ourselves up with our devotion. God bless you all.
Sunshine, laughter, young folk dreaming of a world they would mourn. Each girl a fair muse, each boy a hero. Ripples bring Friend, all our lives we spend seeking the stars, thinking them almost at hand. How far must we roam ere our minds turn within? Ere we at last understand.